Hey everybody, welcome back to CSE 1322. This is going to be module number 9, part 1. In today's lecture, we're going to start talking about C Sharp. So up until now in the semester, we have only talked about Java. And effectively, starting today, we're going to switch languages. Now, you might ask, why are we doing this? Why don't we just learn Java for the rest of the semester? There's a couple of reasons. So, first off, C Sharp is really, really like Java. When I say really like, I mean 95% of the language is identical to Java. So, it's really easy to learn as another language. But the second reason is that as you work in industry, you're going to need to change language from time to time. Most companies do not do everything in a single language. And even if they do, once they acquire a company or be acquired by another company, the chances are that they're going to have to work in a different language. Depending on the project, they're going to use a language that's appropriate for that project. And so, for example, if they're writing something that's just a quick script to get something done, Python may be a great choice for that. But if they're trying to write a Windows app, they might decide to do that in C Sharp. If they're writing a web server backend, they might decide to do that in Java or JavaScript sometimes, which is a different language. So today we're going to begin C Sharp. So as I say, C Sharp was created by Microsoft. It is a Microsoft language, and it is very, very similar to Java. By some argument, effectively what Microsoft did was they took Java, which at this point had existed for about 20 years, and they figured out what things they didn't like about it and they corrected those things, and that's what they created C Sharp from. So it's designed for Windows, and the first thing is, if you're using a Mac, you're going to have a hard time building GUI applications, which is what we're going to do in part 2 of this module, because C Sharp is designed for building GUI applications on Windows. It's tightly integrated into Windows. You can write C Sharp code that's running on a console, and that can run on a Mac or run on Linux, even for that matter. But predominantly, C Sharp is used for building Windows applications. A big use of it is for anything that is running on Windows, and that includes the Unity game engine. So there's a chunk of games that you've probably played that were written in C Sharp because they're written for the Unity engine. If you're a game design major, then you're going to find that you're going to use C Sharp all the time for Unity. If you're not a game design major, you're still probably going to have to write a Windows application at some point because even today, Windows is still the primary desktop operating system that people use. So, as I say, why are we learning another language? Well, during your career, you're going to have to learn new languages. Whatever is the important language today is going to change over time. Python has only been around for, well, it's a good few years, but still a few years at this point. And people had to learn it because, well, now it's a new language and a lot of people are using it. And likewise, C Sharp has been around for a while. But at some point in the future, those languages will change. There will be other languages out there that people will switch to. And so, as a software developer, you need to get out of your head that you're just going to learn one language and find a job where you code in that language forever. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to learn new languages. And honestly, it's not very difficult to do. The truth is that pretty much all languages look very similar. So, let's take a look at some of the changes that we're going to have here in C Sharp. So, to start off with, at the very beginning of this course, when you started in CSE 1322, we showed you that all code in Java has a skeleton. And we mentioned that there's always a public class, you can call it whatever you want, and then inside it there has to be a public static void main, and that's where you begin your code. Well, in C Sharp, there's a very similar skeleton. It's going to be public class main. By convention, it's usually a lowercase m instead of a capital, and then it's going to be a public static void main with a capital M instead of a lower. Other than that, you can see string has a capital letter in Java and it doesn't in C Sharp, but the two skeletons are almost identical. And that's going to be the theme of this lecture, is I'm going to show you the differences between the two languages, and you're going to come away going, okay, it's pretty much the same language. So, the only other thing that's different in C Sharp is at the top of every program, you're going to have a using statement. So you're going to say using system. This is kind of like your import statements in Java. You know, at the top where you might say import Java util random or import Java util array list. Using system in C Sharp is the same kind of idea. It's a library of code that you need included. If you're going to do any print statements, you need system. So you're going to need system pretty much every single time you write an application. So pretty much at the top of every application you're going to do using system. Now, much like in in Java, when you use IntelliJ as your IDE, you pretty much got all of these things automatically in there for you. There's a skeleton when you start off. The same is going to be true in C Sharp. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio, which is the IDE we're going to use for C Sharp, and I'm going to say I want to create a new project. It's going to ask me what type of project. Visual Studio is capable of writing code in a lot of different languages, and it's capable of writing a lot of different types of applications, from GUI applications to console applications and so on. So you have to tell it what you're trying to do here. And in this case, I'm doing C Sharp on Windows, and I'm going to pick one that says console application that includes C Sharp. Make sure it includes C Sharp. If you don't select C Sharp out of this list, you're going to see other choices in there. So make sure you pick that. All right, so once you pick that you want a console app, you're going to hit next down here in the bottom right, and you're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this module 9.1 GUIs, or C Sharp, I mean. All right, and then I'm going to hit next again. It's just down here underneath my image. And it's going to ask you which version of .NET do you want. Okay, so .NET is kind of a set of libraries that exist on Windows. You can use any version that you want. It's not going to matter for anything you're doing in this class. But if you were building an application that was actually going to ship, you'd want to use probably the latest version of .NET. It looks like my machine has an old version on, but it actually doesn't matter. So whatever you have here, if you don't have anything, you're going to have to hit the download button. There's a button to download a .NET, and it does take a minute to download those, like 30 minutes sometimes. But anyway, so once you hit next on all of that, it's going to open up a basic IDE window. And this looks very much like IntelliJ. You've got some panels around it. You've got your code here in the middle. Your output mostly shows down here, although it actually pops open a window. This is the file layout where all the files are actually stored, and um, and so on and so forth. So here in the middle, you can see we have class program, which is what Visual Studio calls the basic class. And then here's my public static void main, and it does say console.writeLine, which is how you print in C Sharp. We're going to cover that in a second, but it just gives you a basic hello world in C Sharp. The way you run code in Visual Studio is you press this button up in the top right, and you can see it's going to pop open a window with your actual code. And here it says hello world, which is of course what it does. When you're done, you just close the window and you're back to it. If you have any compile errors, they're going to show up down here. So that's getting around the basic interface. Other than that, you're just going to write your code the same way that you did. So let's get back to some of the differences between the two codes. So in Java, you had your primitive types. We had bytes, shorts, ints, longs, doubles, floats, and all of those are exactly the same in C Sharp. In Java, you had a char type, same in C Sharp. You had a Boolean type, which was fully spelled out. In C Sharp, it's just known as bool, BOOL, so they just shortened it. And then likewise, there's a string type in Java, which has a capital S. The same thing exists in C Sharp, except it has a lowercase s. So just all of the primitive types are pretty much the same. String isn't actually a primitive type, but it's kind of treated like one. And you just have to remember to put a lowercase s on it and don't spell out Boolean. If you do spell out Boolean, of course, the IDE is going to bark at you, and then you'll remember, oh, that's right, in C Sharp, it's just bool. All right, so how do we do print statements? Well, in Java, of course, you had system.out.println. In C Sharp, you have console.writeLine. So console.writeLine, and then you pass in parentheses the string that you want to print out. And if you have more than one string, you can add them together with the plus sign like you normally would. So pretty much works exactly the same as Java, except you're going to switch out system.out.println to console.writeLine. Really easy. Likewise, in Java, there's print system.out.print and system.out.println, and the difference is whether you get the carriage return. The same thing exists here in C Sharp. It's console.write versus console.writeLine. I will also point out that writeLine is fully spelled out, whereas in Java, of course, it's print ln, but it's line here in C Sharp. Reads a little bit better, honestly. All right. In Java, if you wanted to read something in, you would have a scanner, and you'd say import Java util scanner, and then scanner, my scanner equals new scanner system.in in parentheses, and then you're able to say myscan.nextLine in order to get in a line. You don't have to do all of that in C Sharp. One thing that they fixed, because I would say that the scanner is annoying in Java, one thing that they fixed in C Sharp is they just gave you a console.readline. If you're coming from a Python background, this is going to remind you of the input a whole lot. It's a lot easier. You don't have to do all the crazy with scanner. Um, console.readline does not print anything on the screen. So if you want to print out, please choose from the following menu, you have to do that with a console write line, just like you would in Java. But to read information in, you would generally set up a string that's going to hold the answer equals console.readline. Boom, done. You get a string back. If what you're trying to get is something that's a number, you're going to have to convert that into a number, and that's done through a parse method. So console.readline always gives you a string. To be fair, that's true in all the languages. In Python, you always get a string. In Java, you get a string if you're doing a next line. Here in C Sharp, console.readline always gives you a string. So if you need that to become an integer, you're going to say int32.parse, and that's going to give you back an integer, which you can then use. Likewise, if you're trying to convert it to a double or a boolean or a character or any of the other ones, you can use the name of the class dot parse, and that will pretty much get you to whatever type you want. But generally, you're going to do int32 parse or double 32 parse. Those are going to be the two most common ones. There is also a convert dot to double or convert dot to int32, which will allow you to convert things. It's just a different way of doing it, and it does the same exact thing. Okay, so that's input and output. Okay, a little bit different. You got to remember console.write instead of system.out.println, but really not that bad. All right, all of these operators work the same as they do in Java. So you can add numbers, subtract, multiply, divide, do a mod. That's what this percent sign is. If you want to get the modulus, the remainder of a division, that's what mod does. Of course, you have the logical ones like not, and or. They work exactly the same. You have equal, equal, not equal, less than, greater than, or equal. All those work the same. I will point out that in C Sharp, you can directly compare strings. That's another thing they just kind of fixed. You know that crazy where in Java you have to say string dot equals and the other string? In C Sharp, you can just say if this string equals that string, and it knows what to do with it. Um, if statements work the same, else ifs work the same, else's work the same, and even switch statements work the same. So remember in Java, if you have a switch statement, you have to say in each of the cases the word break at the end of the statement, at the end of each of the cases. You don't have, well, you do have to do that in C Sharp as well, but the difference is in Java, if you forget it, it just behaves weirdly. In C Sharp, if you forget it, the compiler barks at you and says you forgot your break. So again, they just kind of fixed weirdnesses that Java has always had that you've had to deal with. All right, string objects. So let's imagine we have a string. We set it equal to test, comma, 1, comma, 2. We have all the usual methods that we can call on a string like we were able to in Java. So like if we want to get the length of the string, it's just the name of the variable dot length. And so in this case, that would return 8 because there are 8 characters. If you want to get out a single character out of the string, the nice thing about C Sharp is that it treats all strings as if they are arrays automatically. So you can pull out an individual character out of the string by simply addressing the string variable name, so example in this case, with square brackets and a number. So this will pull out the 0th character or the first character out of the string for you, and it will store it wherever you put it. So that's really cool. Um, if you want to get a character array, you can do two-char array. That exists in Java, it exists in C Sharp. But honestly, since you can just treat it like an array at any time, it's not really as useful in C Sharp. It's just inherently that's how it works. Substring, this is if you want to pull out a part of the string. I will point out that in C Sharp it works slightly differently. In Java, you give it the starting position and the ending position that you want to pull out. In C Sharp, you give it the starting position and how many characters you want to pull out. So this doesn't give you the string from 2 to 3, it gives you the string from 2 to 5 because it gives you 3 characters starting at position 2. So that's a little weird. Honestly, if you're coding in C Sharp and you've been a Java coder for a while, these are the things that are going to trip you up, but you're going to quickly realize they're wrong when you print out what you got and you're like, wait, why is that wrong? And then you're going to look it up and remember, oh, yeah, Java does it differently than C Sharp. All right, we have the split method. This does the same thing that it does in Java. It takes a string and it splits it into an array of strings. So for example, if I were to split this example on comma, then I'll get an array that has test in the first cell, 1 as a string in the second cell, and 2 as a string in the third cell. So same as in Java. The main difference here on some of these is the capital letters. You'll notice that in Java, this is split with a lowercase. This is substring with a lowercase. This is two-char array where the T is lowercase. So all these are the same. They just have a capital letter to start each of them, which is just different. All right, and so over here we continue on. We have two upper, which will convert the whole string to uppercase, two lower, which converts it to lowercase, trim, which will trim it. And if you forget that you can just use equal equal, you can still use dot equals. That still works in C sharp. Again, I'm going to say this a lot in this video. They basically took Java and made a new language based on it. So they carried over all of the weirdnesses from Java, just so that if you're so used to coding in Java and you code it that way, it just works. You kind of have to remember the capital letter, but the compiler will teach you that. Notice there's almost always the same method name as in Java. It's just it has a capital letter in C sharp. All right, so that brings us to 1D arrays. All right, so if you're dealing with 1D arrays, they work exactly the same. Nothing changed. So an array of integers would be int square brackets. You give it a variable name equals new int, and then you tell it how big you want. That's exactly the same as in Java. The only thing that's different with arrays in C sharp is if you want a multi-dimensional array, you do it slightly differently. You do it with square brackets and then a comma to indicate that there are two things in that square bracket. Just to remind you, if you were doing this in Java, you would have said int open close square bracket and then open close square bracket again. You put in a square bracket for each dimension that you're going to have. But in C sharp, you do one with a comma. Okay, that one's a bit weird. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I agree that that's better. I think every other language does it with the two square brackets. I've never seen any other language do the comma. And this is one that trips me up. Anytime that I write C sharp code, I forget this and I get a compile error. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right, the stupid comma. All right. So all of that works the same way. So if you want to put something into a multi-dimensional array, my 2D array at 0, 0 equals 1, that puts the number 1 into cell 0, 0, which is row 0, column 0. Likewise, row 2, column 3 gets a 5. And if I want to print out something, I can do the same thing. So other than the comma, which is just different than the two square brackets, it works exactly the same as in Java. All right, loops. While loops, do loops, and for loops, they're all identical. No changes whatsoever. The only one that's a little different is the for each loop. And again, I kind of feel like they fixed a problem here. So in Java, you can have a for loop or a for each loop, and they both start with the word for. And the only thing that changes is whether you have the colon to specify, if you're doing an array of integers, you would say int x colon my array in Java. So in C sharp, instead of it both being for, they have two different words. If you mean a for loop, you use for. If you mean a for each loop, you use for each. So for each int num in my array do stuff is the C sharp syntax, whereas for int num colon my array is the Java syntax. So it's slightly different. But I mean, honestly, this is better, right? For each actually makes sense and it's not a for loop. And you use the word in instead of a colon because why is it a colon? I don't know, because reasons. So here we have an in, and that's great. So I kind of feel like they fix things here. For each num in my array. Again, something you're going to forget every time you code in C sharp, and then you're going to go, oh yeah, the for each word. All right. Array lists. In Java, we had array lists. They automatically shrink and grow. The exact same structure exists in C sharp. They're just called list instead of array list. So it works exactly the same thing. Using systems collection generic, that's how you include it. So in Java, you would say import Java util array list. Here you say using systems collections generic. And this is a separate using line than using system that is always there. So for example, over in my ID window here, if I want to use this, I would up at the top import, sorry, there you go. Using system, yeah, system dot collections dot generic. There we go. And then down inside my code, I can now make a list. And then you specify in angle brackets, just like you do in Java, that you want this to be of string. You call it my list equals new list of string. And you still have the parentheses. And then if you want to put something in there, you do mylist.add. Now in Java, it was .add. In C Sharp, it's .add with a capital A. And we're going to put enda in there. And then you can have mylist.add, capital A, Fred. And that produces a list, and you've added two items to it. And yes, there were errors. What are my errors? No, it worked. Okay, great. I didn't do anything with the list, but there you go. So it works exactly the same as in Java. You just call it list instead of array list. Um, the other difference is that in Java, the initial capacity of the list was 10. In C Sharp, the initial capacity is 16. Doesn't really change anything, but there you go. Um, okay, so other methods that you can use with regarding a list, you certainly have add, you have remove, and remove at. So in Java, remove is overloaded. You can either give it an object that you want it to remove, and it'll try and find that object in the list, or you can give it an index that you want to remove the item in index 3, and it will remove the item in index 3. C Sharp gave you two separate methods, remove at and an index, or remove and you give it the object. Clear removes everything, contains tells you if something is in there, it's a Boolean. Find index will tell you where something is in the array list. That one's really handy. Is empty tells you if you're full empty or not. Insert is how you specifically put something in a particular cell. If you needed it to be in cell 4, but you have nothing else in there, you would do an insert instead of an add. An add will always put it in the next available cell. Sort sorts the list. Count tells you how many items are in there. Okay, I will do a small aside and tell you that the bane of my existence is how do you tell how big an array list, a list, a string is? Because for some strange reason between Java and C Sharp, I think they picked every possible word for this. It's dot length, it's dot count, it's dot yeah, sometimes it's count with a capital C, sometimes it's count with a lowercase c, sometimes it's length with a capital C, sometimes it's length with parentheses, and I can never remember which one it is. Size is the other one. So length, count, or size. It's one of those. One of them counts strings, one of them counts arrays, one of them counts array lists, and one of them counts count lists, and good luck remembering which one is ever. The joy of moving from language to language is I couldn't tell you exactly how, honestly, without this slide in front of me. If you had asked me, how do you tell how many items are in a list in C Sharp, I would have said dot length or dot count or dot size. It's one of those three. I couldn't tell you. I'm going to type the three of them in and see which one the compiler doesn't kick back because I don't remember. I can't remember all of these little intricate details. If you're coding in the language day in and day out, of course you'll get used to it, and that's cool. But if you only do it once every now and again, you're going to have a hard time remembering it. But that's okay. Just type it in and see if it works. The compiler will tell you if it's right or not. So, yay. Um, all right. There is such a thing as an array list in C Sharp, in addition to the fact that it has lists. Just use lists. So if you're going to ignore any part of this video, ignore the next 30 seconds. Use lists, it's the correct answer. Array lists exist in C Sharp. The difference is they don't have the angle brackets with the type. Everything you put into an array list in C Sharp is converted to an object. And when you pull it back out, it comes back out as an object. So if you put in the number 7, what you get back is an object that contains the number 7, which is not usually what you want. That's why we say just don't use array lists. There are specific circumstances where later on you might want them, but overall just use lists. Lists make your life better. All right, so here's a quick example with some code. You're using system collections generic. We make a list of integers. Oh, by the way, that's another thing they fixed. In Java, you have to say integer with a capital I. This is the only time you ever have to do that, and it always confuses you. In C Sharp, you don't have to do that. You can just use int. Um, for I equals 0 to 5, mylist.add I, that's going to put in 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 into the array list. And then for each int x in my list, that's the for each loop to print out all of the items in there. So that prints out the content of the array list. This is just going to print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on a line by itself. All right, so that's how you use the equivalent of array lists, which are really called lists. Let's talk about methods in C. So they work the same as in Java. You do public static void, you give it a name, you have parentheses, and you give it the parameters. All of that is exactly the same. The way you call a method is exactly the same. There are a few additional things you can do in C Sharp that you can't do in Java. So we're going to talk through those. But overall, making methods, defining methods, calling methods, it all works the same as it does in C Sharp. And the way that parameters are passed, same thing. If you pass in an integer, you get a copy of the value. If you pass in an object, then you get the actual reference to the object. And so anything that happens to the dog in the method affects the dog in the real world. Whereas with an integer, if you change the number from 6 to 7, then it's changed only in the method from 6 to 7. All right. So all that's the same as in Java. The specific things that you can do in addition in C sharp, there are two new keywords that you can use. When you create parameters in the parameter list, you can specify that they're referential or you can specify that they're out. If you specify that they're ref, instead of being passed by value, which is what happens when you're passing in a primitive type, if you pass it by ref, it will actually pass a reference to that object, and as a result, anything that changes in the class, or sorry, anything that changes in the method will change outside the method. So it basically makes it work the other way. And so here's an example of that. So we have in our main method, we have a, which is set equal to 42. And if we print out a, of course, it prints 42. Now we're going to make a call to a method called b, and we're going to pass it ref a. So instead of just passing an a, we're passing it ref a. Up in our method B, we specify that this is going to come in as a reference. So we say ref int x, x plus equals 9. Okay, so A was 42 and we passed A up. But since we're passing it by reference, x is 42 and it's actually the same variable as A. X and A are the same variable. So because of that ref keyword. So if we do x plus 9, then all of a sudden x is equal to 51, but so is A. And that's not normally how it works without that ref keyword. The change that you would have had up here when you did x plus equals 9 only changes x. The A is still the same at 42. But if you pass the ref keyword, all of a sudden they're the same variable, and so they're both changed. All right, the out keyword allows you to have more than one return type from a method. Huh? So in Java, there's a rule that all methods can only return one type. And in the method header, you say public static void my, or do stuff, and that returns a void, or public static int do stuff, and that returns an int. But there's a rule that you can only have one return type. So what happens if you need to pass back an array and a boolean? Well, you can't really do that in Java. You have to kind of do hokey things to make that work. In C sharp, you can absolutely do it. In the parameters at the top, you can specify that the parameter is an out parameter. So this is a method B, which returns a void, but has an out parameter of X. And look how you use it. So we say int A down in main, and then we say B out A, which means that the value is going to come out of the method B and get stored in the variable A. So up here, when we say x is 9, that automatically returns to this a down here, and the a is also 9. All right, so cool. We have these two new keywords, ref and out. How often are you going to use them? Probably never. I mean, honestly, they're not things that you use every day, but they do exist, and we wanted you to know about them. But they're not very common. You're probably going to code it the same way you coded it in Java, because, well, frankly, that's where you learn to code. So you're going to keep doing whatever you've been doing. All right. Another cool feature that C Sharp offers is what's called operator overloading. This is something that exists in C++ as well, but it doesn't exist in Java. In Java, if you had a dog and you needed to be able to add another dog to it, I don't know what that would look like. I assume there's some kind of machine that just, and then you have the new big dog. No idea. Anyway, so we have a need to add two things together that are objects. And in Java, what you would do is you'd probably have an add dog method or a subtract dog method. And in C sharp, you can actually just have the plus sign be how you add dogs. All right, so let's do an example because this probably makes no sense to you what I'm talking about. So we have a dog, we called it my dog, and my dog apparently has a name of CSE. Here, CSE, good boy. And it also has a weight of 8. We'll assume pounds. Your dog, on the other hand, has a name of 1322. Who's a good boy? 1322 is a good boy. And it has a weight of 9. So we have my dog and we have your dog. And for some strange reason, we would like to make the Uber dog, which is the combination of my dog and your dog. So we're going to pass that up to the dog class up here at the top, has these attributes for the weight and the name, and it has a constructor, and that all, so far, we're good. But then we have this weird thing where we say, by the way, in the dog class, we have this method, public static dog operator plus, which takes in dog1 and dog2, and it returns a dog. So the way that it works is it creates a new dog called combo dog. It adds the names together with a colon in between, and then it adds the weight together because if you merge two dogs, they're going to be the weight of the combined dogs. This got really weird and kind of dark. Anyway, hope the Uber dog does well. But the important part of this slide is that it is possible to make a operator method, which tells you how you're going to overload the plus sign. If you wanted to overload the minus sign to do dog subtraction, then you would say operator minus. You can also do dog division and dog multiplication, and we're not going to talk about either of those. Okay, so a cool feature, again, not something you're probably going to use every day, but you will see it in code. I know that the dog example is silly, but you certainly could have a circumstance where you have two triangles and they're each represented as a class triangle, and you might want to be able to add the two triangles together, and that actually does make sense in that case. Dogs, not so much. All right, so subject of classes in C, how do you do them? In C sharp, I mean, sorry. You just define them exactly the same as you did in Java. So you say public class dog, and it has curly braces, and you put all your methods and all your attributes inside of those curly braces. Works literally exactly the same. The constructors work exactly the same. Put a constructor in there, you just say public dog. It has to match the name of the class, takes parentheses, and you can either have parameters or not. Just like in Java, every class in C Sharp is a child of object unless you specify otherwise. All right. So that brings us to one thing that is different. I don't know where to be in this window. I'll be over here. No, that doesn't work. I'll be down here. Hello. I'll just talk to you from down here. Okay. So in Java, all attributes and methods are public by default. So when you make a attribute or a method in a class, it's automatically public. But in C Sharp, they decided to do the opposite. They made everything private by default. All right, I'm going to pause and we're going to pontificate for just a moment as to who's right about this. So, Java, everything is public unless you specify otherwise. So, you have to remember to put private on front of all of your attributes because that's what you should be doing. You should be making all of your attributes private. C Sharp decided, you know what, we're just going to make everything private. So all of your attributes are automatically private. But also, for some strange reason, all of your methods are going to be private as well. So if you want your method to be usable by anybody, then you're going to have to put the word public on front of it. So I hate to be this guy, but the correct answer was somewhere in the middle of those two, and both of them got it wrong. The correct answer is not that everything should be public, because that's really bad because it encourages you to have public attributes, which you shouldn't have. And the correct answer is not everything should be private, because all of your methods should be public. That's why you're writing methods. The correct answer should have been that all attributes were private and all methods were public, and if you want anything else, you overwrite it. But that's not where we are. In Java, everything public. In C Sharp, everything private because reasons. So in C Sharp, you're going to have to remember to put public on front of every method you write in a class. If you do not do that, it always worked in Java. It does not work in C Sharp. So that's one where, yeah, kind of not great, but here we are. So there you go. Inheritance in C Sharp. If you have a class and you want to make a class below it that inherits from above, in Java you said extends class fluffy dog extends dog. We're back to the Uber dog again. All right, so extends was the key word in Java. In C Sharp, they removed extends and just used a colon. Okay, I can see it either way. So here we have class mammal, public float weight, public int IQ, and then we have a class dog colon mammal, which is a child of mammal. All right, you can argue whether that's better or not. I don't know. It is what it is. Just remember it's a colon, not the word extends. ToString. In Java, you have a toString if you need to use a class as a string. The same thing exists in in C Sharp. It's also called toString. It just has a capital T. You'll forget that capital T every time. And also the string is a lowercase s instead of a capital S. So lowercase your s and capitalize your T and life will be good. Other than that, it's the same thing. The super keyword in Java. So public dog, and then we call super. This is a constructor for dog that takes in two things, and I just wanted to call super on my parent's constructor. Remember, that's what the super keyword did. The equivalent in C sharp is base. The other thing that they did is they put it in a weird place in C sharp. So in Java, there is a rule that if you call super, it has to be the first line in a method. You probably didn't know that. You've probably never tried to put it anywhere else in the method, but there is a rule in Java. If you try to put super anywhere in a constructor other than at the first line, it barks at you. Barks at you. We're back to the dog. So basically what happened is C sharp said, well, if you're going to force them to put it on the first line, let's just really put it on the first line up in the header. So in C sharp, you say public dog, this is your constructor, and it takes in two parameters. And then weirdly, they use the colon again, and then base, which is their keyword for super, XY. So this is saying you're going to have a method, which is a constructor in dog. It takes in an X and a Y, and the thing it does first is it calls the parent's constructor and passes it X and Y. And then after that, if there's any code in these curly braces, you do that next. But the base goes right here on the header line after a colon, which is also used for the inheritance thing, but that's in a class, not in a method, so it kind of makes it. They really like colons in C sharp. Okay, the next one, which is also a little bit weird. In Java, if you create a method in a parent, it's inherently the case that the child can override it. If the child doesn't like it, they can just say public override and away they go. In C sharp, they didn't make it automatic. If the parent wants the child to be allowed to override it, the parent must put the word virtual in there. So that's a little bit weird. So here we have a class mammal, which is a child of object, because everybody's a child of object. I don't know why we wrote that. And then we say public virtual void make noise. Okay, so what I'm saying is there's a method, it returns void, and it's called make noise. It takes in no parameters, but it's virtual, which means the child is permitted to override it. And then you have your console.write line. Now, ooh. All right, so then we have our class dog, which inherits from mammal, or extends mammal, but colon, and it has a public override of void make noise. Okay, so there's a couple of things here that are going on. Override is the keyword, and it is required here in C sharp. So in Java, remember there was the whole at override that you could put on top of a method, and if you forgot it, it works anyway. It's optional. It's not optional in C sharp. You have to put it in there, and it goes right in the header. It doesn't go above the header. Again, I feel like this is better. This is how it should have been in Java. Public override. I am making an override. This will only be permitted if the parent is virtual. So that's a weird thing. It's like there's permissions. When you make the parent, you can specify if the child is allowed to change that or if they must inherit what you get from above. Eh? Okay, so that's new functionality for you. In here, then we're calling base to call the parent. This is a call to a method. In the parent, it's not a constructor, and so it doesn't go right here on the line. It only goes here on the line when it's a constructor. Other than that, all the same. So override, it's a keyword. You have to put it in the header. And if you're going to override something in the parent, you have to mark it as virtual. I will tell you this. Every time I write C sharp code, I have to get a complaint from the compiler that the parent isn't virtual, and then I have to go back and put it. To be fair, the error message that you get if you forget this virtual keyword is the parent's method is not declared virtual. So it's pretty obvious what's wrong. So if you get that error, it's because you forgot the word virtual. All right. Inheritance works the same as it does in Java. Everything is exactly the same. If you have something in the parent and it is public or protected, the child can inherit it. If it's private in the parent, the child doesn't get to see it. If the child doesn't like it, it can overwrite it, assuming that it was marked virtual. All of that works exactly the same as it does in Java. There is no difference except for the colon instead of the extends. Other than that, identical. All right. Here's a weirdness. I told you that they really love colons. In C sharp, if you want to use implements for an interface, which works exactly the same, instead of saying class dog implements italkable, you just say class dog colon italkable. So implementing an interface and extending a class is the same thing in C sharp. There is no distinction in the nomenclature of how you declare that that's what you're doing. So here's interface italkable. Writing an interface works exactly the same. You have all of your methods. They're inherently public and abstract because that's how interfaces work in all languages. So void talk, semicolon, and then notice that there is no curly braces. You can't have the curly braces. So all of that part of it is exactly the same as in Java. But what's not the same is when you go to implement that interface, you just say class dog colon italkable, and that's how you say implements. So that's probably getting you to the question of, well, what happens if you have more than one interface to implement? So class dog colon italkable comma iConsumer. So kind of the same thing, but now what's really in your head is what happens if you have a class and you have an interface and you want to extend the class and implement the interface. Well, you just say class dog colon mammal comma talkable. That's extending mammal and implementing talkable. Now, you might say, wait, have the rules changed? Can I do multiple extensions? Can I have two parents? No, you cannot have two parents because we are coders and you will have one parent only. So class dog colon can have one class, which can be abstract or concrete, and as many interfaces as you want, comma separated. But the rules are still the same as in Java. It's just that the nomenclature is a colon instead of an implements and an extends. All right. So I don't know. Is that better or worse? It's something. Instance of. So if you wanted to check if something is an instance of in Java, you would say if M instance of dog. In C sharp, you just use is, which that one's definitely better because instance of is a bit lottie top. Whereas if M is dog kind of makes sense. If M is talkable, yes. So you can check if something is an instance of something that returns true or false. All right, recursion works exactly the same as it does in Java. Literally exactly the same. So nothing about recursion is different. That whole topic, same. So here we have a reverse string, which says if the length of the string is 1, then return the string. Otherwise, return the reverse of the whole string minus the first letter plus the first letter. That's pretty much how you would have written it in Java, except that will be a lowercase s, that will be a lowercase l, I think, and that will be a capital S. Other than that, this is the same code. All right, exceptions. In case you're wondering how we're doing this, we're doing all of the topics that we did the entire semester in Java. We're just doing them in the same order in C sharp. So exceptions and error handling, which was module number it's that one that's right before file IO. This works the same way. You can have try catch blocks. They work exactly the same. The only thing that's slightly different is the name of the exceptions are slightly different. So honestly, I couldn't tell you the right answers here. Index out of range exception is how you know that you've gone past the end of an array in C sharp. I think it's something like out of index out of range. Yeah, I don't know. It's something similar in Java, but not exactly the same. So pretty much you'll run the code, you'll get the exception, and then you know what the name is. So you can then code it. But other than that, everything works the same. So you can have try catch blocks, you can have finally blocks just like you do in Java, but you probably never will. You put the same code in them, you catch exception E. All of that works exactly the same. So here we have some code. So we have public static void do stuff, which throws a new exception, CSE 1322. Down in my main, I say try do stuff. And since that obviously throws an exception, that catches exception and it prints out exception thrown and it prints out the message. In Java, you would have said e.get message. In C sharp, it's just e.message, and it's not a method, it's an attribute. So in Java, it's e.get message parentheses, whereas in C sharp, it's e.message, no parentheses, because reasons. Um, if you want to make your own exception, works the same. You create a class, call it whatever you want. It's a child of exception, so you put in colon exception instead of extends exception. You give it a constructor and an overloaded constructor, and the overloaded constructor just calls the parent. That's exactly what you would have done in Java, except that would have said extends. Other than that, that would be a lowercase s, and life would be good. You know, now that I'm looking at this, I think that should be a lowercase s. I'm going to fix that right after now and repost these slides. All right. Paleo. In Java, you would have used, if you're reading in a text file, you would have used file and scanner. So you would have said file, my file equals new file, and then scanner, my scan equals new scanner, my file in parentheses, and then you just use the scanner to read the file. All of that's combined into a stream reader here in C sharp. So let's take a look at some code. You're going to say stream reader, call it whatever you want, equals new stream reader, and you give it the file name right there in that line. So again, two lines in Java, it becomes one line here in C sharp. In Java, you say while the scanner has next line. Remember that? Here in C sharp, you say while the scanner, or sorry, the stream reader is not at end of stream. So that one's a little weird. Kind of better, maybe, but it's certainly fine. So while not stream reader is at end of stream, so stream reader dot end of stream, you do an sr dot read line, which is the same as your scanner.next line. It just reads in one line of text, and then you can break that line up as a string and make an array of strings and do whatever it is you're doing with it. So all the rest of this code is the same, but you're going to use stream reader and you're going to use while not end of stream. That's how you read stuff in from a file. Writing to a file is done with stream writer. So again, like let's just talk about the differences here. In Java, you have file and you have stream reader, and then you have print writer, and none of, or sorry, you have file and scanner and print writer, and none of those things are named the same. And you need two when you're reading, and you need one when you're writing, and all that kind of is there. In C sharp, you have stream reader and stream writer. They work exactly the same way. One of them you use a write line to write, the other one you do use a read line to read. Yay, they made things better. Okay, so printing to a file, we just do a stream writer, which opens a stream writer. You tell it the file name, and then you do write lines to the file. And then when you're done, you do a stream reader close. They're doing that in a finally that checks if the stream reader was opened, because any of these, of course, can throw exceptions, which is why they're in a try catch block. All this is C sharp code, and it works fine to make a file. So works the same way as a print writer in Java, but it's a little cleaner. All right, and the difference between appending and overwriting, if you remember in Java, both Java and C Sharp automatically overwrite a file if you use their print writer or stream writer. If you don't want to overwrite the file, you want to just add data to the end of a file, then in C Sharp, you just add the word true after the name of the file when you declare the stream reader. And that means that it's opening it for appending instead of opening it for writing, which would overwrite the file. So that's cool. There's an equivalent in Java that we covered in the slides. All right, so where do you write all the files? If you're looking for where Visual Studio is putting everything, they're in C:users, whatever your username is, slash source, slash repos, slash whatever you called your application, slash whatever you called your application, slash bin, slash debug, slash net 6.0, or whatever version of .NET you're using. So yeah, that's a really long path. If you're on a Mac or a Linux machine, it's just going to be slash users, slash your name, slash source repos, and so on and so forth. So if you don't want to use the default directory, because remember, this is the problem of you want it to read a text file and you tell it how to read the text file, but then doesn't seem to be able to find the text file, it's because it's in the wrong folder. That's the folder you need to put it in if you want it to be able to read the file. And if you don't want to put it in that folder, you can tell it where you put the file with a fully qualified file name. So C:\users slash Bob slash desktop slash my file, or wherever it is that you put it. All right. Writing a binary file in C sharp is done with a binary writer. Not really something we're ever going to test you on, but we want you to know that that exists. Reading from the intranet. So over in Java, you've made a socket and then you were able to connect to a remote machine. Same idea works here. It's just called a TCP client, which again is a better name. So TCP client, my TCP, or new TCP client, you tell it the URL you want to go to, that's the machine name you're connecting to, and the port that you're connecting to, that works the same as it does in Java. Then you tell it to get a stream, and then you open stream readers and stream writers on that stream, that network stream that you just created. And then you write to the stream or you read from the stream, depending on what it is you're trying to do. So this is the code for getting the homepage in Google in C sharp. The equivalent code is on the slides back in file.io for Java. So we're just giving you the same code, but in a different language this time. And remember the whole thing with Music Brains, where we gave you an API? This is the equivalent code in C Sharp for doing that. And again, it's just using a TCP client, a network stream, a stream reader, and a stream writer to be able to communicate with a socket on the internet. All right, using and main method. Okay, yes, this is the main method from the previous code. That is the weirdest labeled slide ever. I will fix that also right after this video. All right, threads in C, they work, sorry, in C sharp. There is another language called C. I need to be careful not to say that. So threads in C sharp are very similar to Java. You don't implement runnable because that's not a thing in C sharp. You just simply use a thread start to specify where you want to start. So here we have a class dog. You don't have to say dog implements runnable. You give it whatever parameters and whatever attributes it should have. It may have a constructor, and then you can call this method whatever you want. In Java, you had to call it run and it had to return void. That's actually quite limiting, and C Sharp fixed that by allowing you to call it whatever you want, and it can return any method type that you want it to return, and it can even take parameters, which is nice. The Java one can't. So in here, you have whatever code you actually want the thread to be able to run. Then down in your main method, you create a dog. In this case, we create a second dog. And then you use this thread start to specify which method you want the threads to run. So basically, thread start ts1 equals new thread start. And I'm using d1, which is the name of this dog, dot run. You don't put parentheses after it, you just say d1 dot run. Likewise, thread 2 will use d2 dot run, and then you make the threads on the thread starts. You can combine all of this into a single statement. The creation of the dog, the creation of the thread start, and the creation of the thread by saying thread t1 equals new thread, parentheses, new thread start, parentheses, new new dog, close parenthesis, close parenthesis, close parenthesis. So you can combine all that into one, but you can also specify it in separate statements like this. All right, there is also something in C Sharp called the thread parallel library. Not something you're going to use every day, but if you want to write something that's multi-processor or multi-threaded, another thing you can use is the thread parallel library. This is another thing where C Sharp did it really, really well. One thing that's nice about the thread parallel library, you write your code such that it is threadable, and then the interpreter, or in this case, the virtual machine that's running your code, it decides how much it can parallelize your code automatically for you. In Java, you have to make guesses and you have to specify how much you want it to do that. In Java, it's called fork join pools. We don't cover that in class. You're not going to cover the task parallel library. We're not going to ask you about this, but we want you to be aware that it exists. You have things like a parallel for each, which then inherently can be broken up such that each for each can be run on its own processor, which is really nice. Okay, data structures in C Sharp. Again, pretty much works the same way. Linked list class that you can add in stuff to. You've stacks, you've queues, you've graphs. All of the same things that existed in Java, they still exist in C Sharp. They might be called slightly different things. If you are new to coding C Sharp, something you're going to do a lot is to type into Google something like, what is the equivalent of a hash map from Java in C Sharp? And it's going to tell you what the name of that class is and give you the documentation. All the documentation for C Sharp is going to be on Microsoft's site because, again, the language was made by Microsoft. All the Java documentation is actually on Oracle's site because Java is owned by Oracle these days. So all of that documentation is still there for you to use, and all the classes still exist. So that all works out pretty much the same way. The dictionaries that we talked about, they have remove and get and clear. You can do for each on them. This is the syntax for how you do for each with regard to getting the keys or the values in a dictionary. They're called dictionaries here instead of hash maps, which is what we call them in Java. So all the same functionalities there. It's just the keywords are going to be ever so slightly differently on that one. But all the rest of it is the same. So linked lists work the same way, all the other data structures that we talked about. Okay, so this is the list of slides that talks about the differences. This is not 100% of the differences between Java and C Sharp, but it is most of them. As far as this class is concerned, I was able to cover in probably an hour or however long this video has been, all the differences between the two languages, and you can now actually go off and start writing code in in C sharp. You will again find that you're going to be tripping a little bit in the beginning, because you're going to run into just weirdnesses where you're like, I don't remember what the keyword for that is, but it works exactly the same way. So go ahead and start writing code in C sharp. The main reason that we switched you to C sharp is because the next thing we're going to cover in the next video is GUIs and graphics. And if I'm being completely honest with you, Java sucks at that. It used to be that we taught this class simultaneously in the two languages, and when we got to the part where we taught GUIs, honestly, the C sharp lecture was about 20 minutes long. The Java lecture was at least 3 days, and everybody was pulling their hair out by the end of it. It's just not really well designed. If you are interested in writing graphics and GUIs in Java, you're going to use Java FX. That's the name of the program. And there's plenty of documentation out there, and it's the officially supported one for writing graphics and GUIs. But honestly, it is painful. And very few people write graphics and GUIs in Java at this point. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm saying it's not common. Either you're writing a Windows app, and in that case, you're most likely going to use C sharp, not Java, or you're writing something that's web based, in which case you're probably not going to be using well, you're certainly not using Java GUIs for that. You're going to be using HTML or React or one of the web languages with some JavaScript, and then use Java as the backend. That's fine, but not the GUI part, not the graphical part at the front. So the next thing we're going to show you is how to build a GUI using C sharp. And again, that's going to be a much easier experience than trying to do it in Java, because honestly, C sharp did it much, much better. So that completes today's lecture. Go start coding stuff in C sharp. You'll find that it's not actually very difficult, and you'll find that you'll actually kind of enjoy it. There's a few things that they legitimately made better than they were in Java. And I will see you guys in the next video.